Hi everyone, my name is Merna. Welcome to Soul Struggles. We're going to be discussing everyday struggles that we go through in our lives, especially during our current pandemic. Today we have with us Agaibi, who is a therapist with a master's and doctoral level training in counseling psychology and a focus in resilience, and she works with children, adolescents, and youth. So our topics that we're going to be discussing are depression, anxiety, phobias, and trauma, enhancing self-esteem, cultivating resilience, creating goals for the new year, grace, calmness, and psychological and spiritual self-care for the new year. So for our first video today, we're going to be discussing depression. And our first question is, we have experienced a lot in 2020 and we have been tested. How can we understand depression and what it looks like during this pandemic?
That's an excellent question. And what's interesting about depression and anxiety is that we all at some point will experience it at some point in our lives. Because we go through different phases and different things in our life. This is something that we can experience due to our genetics or due to our circumstances or due to our experiences. And of course, we're experiencing it a lot during this pandemic over the last year or so. And when we adjust well to depression and anxiety or any stress, then that's called adjustment. However, every once in a while, we will not adjust well to those kinds of things because we have a lot of stresses in our lives that can alter our adjustment, and that's called maladjustment. So stress can actually, for a little bit of time, can be really beneficial. Think of if you have an exam coming up or if you have a promotion that you're going to be working towards, that a little bit of stress is good because it'll motivate you to work and to improve your odds of getting that test done well, get you focused, get you motivated. But too much stress can actually have the opposite effect. It can cause you a lot of difficulty, a lot of panic, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression like we're talking about. It can even cause you to be burned out and not to function well. So this is what kind of happens with something like this pandemic, that we're all getting used to all of the challenges that we're experiencing. We're staying home a lot more. We're home with our families a lot more. We're not able to go out and experience things. And this has really become kind of a global crisis. So lots has been disrupted. And if we're watching the news too much, or we're not taking time to get out there and take a walk, and we're staying indoors all day long, that can create a lot of struggle and stress as well. We have seen a lot of people with struggles with things like overeating, undereating. They have low energy, low activity level. They're really fatigued. They're feeling helpless. They have diminished interest in things that they used to have interest in at one point. They're really slowed down. They either have too much sleep or too little sleep. Their self-esteem is affected, and we'll be talking about that in one of the programs as well. Their decision-making abilities have really been affected as well. Their feelings of maybe feelings of worthlessness or feelings of guilt and shame. And some have overeaten and some have undereaten. And so there's a lot of things that can show us that there's struggle going on that goes beyond a little bit of depression or a little bit of anxiety that we may normally feel.
How do we know when we are depressed?
Yeah, another great question. We have these, again, sometimes where we may experience feeling a little sad, and everybody experiences this. But at times when we cannot snap out of it, there's nothing that we can do that can help us to snap out of it. It's not a sign of weakness or a lack of faith or a flaw in you in some sort. It's not something that we can just try harder, like I said, and snap out of it. Those are all signs that there's something going on. And usually when those things happen for a greater period of time than 2 weeks, and we can't snap out of it, and we can't talk to a friend and snap out of it, or talk to a family member, then maybe it's time to get some extra help. And these are fairly common. Some of the statistics out there say that 1 in 5 people will experience some sort of distress in their lifetime. And again, with the pandemic, these numbers are probably increasing, and we're seeing more and more people that are feeling stressed out. Usually, there are physical signs in our body that can tell us when there's a significant amount of stress. There's feeling signs, there's behavioral signs, and there's thoughts that can come along with that too. So some things with our body, some people may feel physical signs. They may feel stomach pains or stomach GI symptoms or headaches, or even stuff with their skin. They may feel fatigued, some skin irritations, like I said. So those may all be body signs that there's something wrong. And additionally, with thinking stresses, they may show some signs with worrying too much, or nightmares, or they are hazy in their decision making. They can't think straight. They can't maybe make a decision that they have to make. And sometimes also with stress, they'll have emotional triggers. again with the depression, or not interested in things that they used to be interested in, or they have a lack of confidence, or they're apprehensive towards certain things. And then also they may have some behavioral signs. They may feel restless, or they're accident prone, or they may use substances more than they did before. So those are all signs that something is going on beyond just a little bit of sadness or a little bit of anxiety, and something that we should look into.
Okay, and at what point would a person need to seek care?
Yeah, so again, we all sometimes experience some sadness and some depression and some anxiety. But with depression that has gone on for most days, every day for over 2 weeks, and again, the symptoms of depression may include things like feeling sad or feeling empty or feeling hopeless or crying a lot or loss of interest in things that used to bring them pleasure, too much sleep, not enough sleep, too much eating, not enough eating, but extreme changes in behavior. If the intensity of things has increased, if the frequency of their depression symptoms have increased. So if they used to be sad once in a while, every here and there, but now their frequency of their depression has increased to being more and more every day. And the intensity of those symptoms. So it used to be a little bit of sadness, but I could shake it, but now you can't. You can't shake it, it's too intense. And the duration, if the duration is too long as well. So it's extended period of time where they're feeling really depressed and really, really sad. If their behavior is erratic and it's going up and down too much, or there's been a lot of cumulative life experiences that have occurred with them recently, these are all signs that maybe it's something that we should look at. One of the biggest signs is that when people start to withdraw, and they want to spend more and more time alone, they don't want to spend time with family or friends or loved ones, and they just want to isolate and be by themselves. Again, every once in a while, that's okay, but if this extends for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it's time to get some help and to talk to somebody who can help you work through those issues.
Okay, and how do we help somebody with depression during the pandemic or beyond, and what resources are available to them?
Yes, great questions again. We want to encourage them to talk. And it's sometimes hard because they don't know what they're feeling, what they're experiencing. They don't even know what emotions they're experiencing. But again, if it lasts more than a couple of weeks, it's time to get some help and to encourage them to talk to someone, and that it's okay to talk to someone. I know that there's a lot of stigma that sometimes goes around these issues and people don't want to talk, but that the more we're able to talk, the better. We want them to stay connected. We don't want them to be, again, isolating. Isolating is a common experience that people have, and they don't want to talk to anyone, but it's important to stay connected and to seek help. They need to see things as they are. A lot of times people will catastrophize and they'll see things a lot worse than they are, and they won't have a solution to any of the problems. And that, again, that's part of the depression sometimes that is talking. So we want to validate their emotions. We want to see their emotions as normal, but also at the same time see that, that they are getting some help and have someone to talk to. They want to see something as a challenge and as an opportunity, and not something as despair. So oftentimes when people are going through a struggle, there's a lot of challenges that they're experiencing, and so they get to that point of despair. But if they see it as an opportunity and they kind of start to reframe their thinking about how can I deal with this situation, how can I look at this a different way, then we're able to deal with that situation a little bit better. We also want people to focus on their strengths. And this is where the resilience piece comes in when we talk about resilience a lot more. But everybody has strengths, and sometimes when we're depressed, we don't see those strengths. All we see is the negative. We see like the walls closing in around us. We don't see anything that is positive. So we want people to lean in on their strengths. What are they good at? What are their hobbies? What gives them joy? What gives them a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning? And to lean in more on those strengths. We also want people to create goals, and that's why one of the later episodes we're going to be talking a lot about goals. How to create good goals for the new year, how to develop goals that will propel you forward. But we always want to create goals so that we're not stuck in this pattern of sadness and depression. Of course, this is a Christian program, and so we want to have faith, and we know that God will help us with the struggles that we're in, and we're not fighting those struggles alone, that God is with us and is helping us to reframe from a more hopeful lens, and that tomorrow's another day, and that this problem will have an end to it at some point. We also want to cultivate connections. I know that we used to have rituals that we would go to, birthday parties and things throughout the year, and I know that COVID has created some struggle with connecting with other people. But we want to connect through technology if we can. I know when this pandemic first started, we started talking a lot about social distancing. I think a better term is, and that term has been starting to be used more, is physical distancing. So we want to be that 6 feet apart, but still connect to people that we love so that we're not isolating and just doing our own thing by ourselves. So we still want to connect to people through phones, through FaceTimes, through Zooms, through whatever we can to still connect to others. We want to know that this is not a punishment from God, that God is not trying to harm us in any way, but instead that He is with us through this struggle, and He's helping us to empower ourselves, and that He can help us to accept that these things are happening, but that we can cultivate change and resilience as well.
And how can we counter our spirituality and faith in God when dealing with depression?
Yeah, another great question, and that's something that we don't often talk about, is if we're going through struggle, does that mean that we have less faith in God? And that's not true, because there's a lot of characters in the Bible that have experienced a lot of struggle. One that I want to point out in particular is the story of the paralyzed man who was paralyzed for 38 years. And that's in the Gospel according to St. John in chapter 5, if you'd like to read it on your own. And so we often talk about the healing in that incident, in that miracle where he was healed from his being paralyzed, but we don't talk a lot about what it must have felt like to be paralyzed for 38 years, what it must have felt like to be alone and not to be helped into the pool of water over those 38 years. There were people around him initially, but after a while they left him alone, and there was no one there to help him to get into the pool. And every time the angel would stir the water, he would not be able to be getting in the pool because he had no help. So that must have felt really lonely, really despair, really hopeless at times. And so is that depression? And there's other examples of this in the Bible. We hear about Job and even St. Paul in the New Testament. There's many examples of people who went through struggles and sadness and sometimes despair and hopelessness. But how do they come out of that is remembering that we are not alone. So Job had a lot of disease. His children were gone. He had a lot of difficulties. Jacob wrestled with God. Joseph was sold into slavery and then was falsely imprisoned. Moses was wandering the desert for 40 years. Naomi and Ruth both lost husbands, and Naomi lost her children as well. Esther had to have the burden of saving her entire people, and she had to stand before the king when it was a big risk to do so. So we have to know that God is near the brokenhearted. He's not leaving us alone. And even these characters in the Bible had struggles. And even Jesus wept. We know that Jesus wept over Lazarus and over Jerusalem. So even Jesus wept and felt some sadness at some point in the Bible. So it's important to look at us holistically. We have to look at us from a biological perspective, from a spiritual perspective, and from a physical perspective in order to overcome the difficulties that we're facing. We have to know that relationships are important. Our own history of overcoming things is important. And so when we look at things through a biological perspective, even from this story of the paralyzed man, you can see that Jesus looked at all four of those things. He helped him physically when he was paralyzed. He helped him with his sadness and told him to go and sin no more, and that he was cured. He found somebody to help him in Jesus, so that's a social kind of help. And so when we're trying to get help ourselves, we need to look at ourselves biologically, physically, psychologically, socially, and spiritually. And so just as Jesus helped the paralyzed man in all aspects of his life, we need to look at Christ to help us in every aspect of our life as well. And religion and spirituality through research has been shown to help us to endure when there's times of difficulty. And that people that are struggling, when they have spiritual beliefs and they have religious beliefs, they tend to have greater mental health and physical health. So we also want to see that spirituality does contribute to our mental and our physical health, and helps us to stay away from things like substances and risky behaviors and even things like depression. So it's really, really important that we use our spirituality to help us as well.
And our last question is, what advice do you have for young Orthodox Christians who are suffering from depression?
Yes. That you're not alone, that a lot of people experience this. Again, 1 in 5, and those numbers probably have increased since the pandemic has started. Hebrews 6:19 tells us that hope anchors the soul, and so that we should have hope, even in the midst of difficulties, even in the midst of stresses. And we have two very powerful tools that can help us. our mind is a very strong, powerful tool that can help us to reframe our thinking, help us to reframe how we're looking at the problem. That the problem, we don't have tunnel vision. We can find support and help people to help us so that we're not stuck, that we're not lost, that we're not hopeless. And then we also have faith on top of it as well. And again, the characters in the Bible that have experienced hardship had faith even in the midst of their difficulties. So they were able to stay kind of resilient even though they went through those difficulties. So between the faith that we have and knowing that God will help us with any situation, but also our ability to reframe our thinking is really important. And we have to remember that nothing will remain the same. The stresses will not remain the same forever. And so times change, things change. This pandemic will end at a certain point of time, that we have choices, that we have ability, that we have ability to take baby steps every day to create goals, to get us out of our stresses, and that you're not alone. Again, there's people out there to help, from our priests to therapists to psychologists to anybody who's willing to help us, even our family members, but that we're not alone and that we can take baby steps to get out of the situations that we're in.
Thank you so much, Christine, for being here. Thank you, everyone. My name is Merna with Soul Struggles, and we'll see you